Welcome to the second episode of the Speak for Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Casey, and I'm so happy to present a guest that I'm just bewildered that agreed to come on this early in my podcasting career, or however you want to call that. So without further ado, this is Clint from Liberty Lockdown and 1/6 of Tower Gang.
Whoopah!
There he is.
In the place to be. What's up,
What's
Casey?
up,
How you
buddy?
doing, man?
Hey, man, I appreciate you coming on this so much. And
Dude, don't
it was
even
a
sweat
surprise that it was so quick.
Dude, I started my show 2.5 years ago. So, that's not a long time. You never know what things will become. So just I like to encourage people that are giving it a go. So I hope you don't become one of the many people that I have been a guest on and then they've backstabbed me and become total sons of bitches and just like my biggest haters. I'm like, I was nice to you. Why are you coming for me? But it's that's the name of the game, man.
Well, are you I bet you're kind of tired of all the drama this month.
Oh yeah. Dude, it's brutal. That's the thing that I didn't expect. I mean, well, first off, I didn't expect my show to grow as rapidly as it did. So I didn't expect to have, so much shit that just came out of nowhere.
Sure.
But I also didn't expect like people within the libertarian sphere to become my mortal enemies. Especially when I had done nothing to them. That was very surprising. So it's weird. It's weird, but I think that what you learn is that regardless of the ideology, there is still people are going to say that I'm being mean or not having enough humility by saying this, but there's jealousy that comes with just because you've excelled faster than some other people, there's still going to be people that even if they value allegedly meritocracy and capitalism and letting the free market decide, if you excel faster than them, some people will just not be able to handle it well. And I didn't really expect that to come from our camp, but it did. And I'm not crying about it. It is what it is.
Well, it reminds me of that quote where it's like all ships rise together on the same tide. So instead of being jealous, it should be everybody lifting each other up, sort of thing.
Well, that's the funny thing is I feel like that's the primary reason I've been successful is because I am not the type that wants to tear anybody down. I am so thrilled when I see anybody in our sphere doing good work. If you're I would love to be on Kennedy once a week like all of my other friends are. I'm not.
Sure.
Do I go after Shane Hazel or Spike Cohen or Olivia Rondeau or Brad Palumbo even? No, I don't. I don't go after any of them because I'm so happy to see our message hitting, a couple 100,000 people every weeknight. That's a beautiful thing. And I think it demonstrates that a lot of people aren't in this for the right reason. That's my honest opinion.
Yeah, you can kind of filter out people by, what they're saying, what they're doing in that respect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think any time that anybody, kind of breaks through, so to speak, it helps all of us.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
We exist in the Overton window that had basically excluded us entirely. Ron Paul shifted it ever so slightly so that we're just barely within the Overton window. Dave Smith has helped us get even further inside the Overton window, and whoever the fuck else is able to get us closer to it, awesome. And I completely disagree with any sort of tearing down others to elevate yourself. This is why I went after that Kalina girl so hard last week, is because that's what she was doing. She was, and that is what she is doing. She is 100% trying to make her name by tearing down people with bigger followings than her. And I just think that is such a sick way of going about things. And she also has the dual advantage of being an attractive woman, and she doesn't have to do that. So it just makes it doubly reprehensible. You're going to grow very rapidly regardless. You don't have to be doing this. But that's just not how some people function. And I just want our community to know you don't have to be that way. You don't have to tear others down to elevate yourself. And it frustrates me, but I'm trying to lead by example. So we'll see if it works.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted to get into that or not. But while we're here, Fed or not?
Honestly, I don't think she's a Fed. I don't. But,
Fair.
Could she be? Yeah. Like, could she be? I mean, I don't think she's an FBI agent. I think that like there's a chance that she was offered money to infiltrate our movement. If you hear her talk about libertarianism, she's not a libertarian. I mean, she's got very, very loose concept of even what libertarianism is. She's basically a health freedom person. Like that's her only priority, really, because of her son. And you know, God bless her. I totally get that, and I would be the same way. But you know, that doesn't make her a libertarian, and it certainly doesn't make her someone who should be the leader of our movement. And to even be talking about her is just nonsensical because no one even knows who the fuck we're talking about. And you know, but I went into it because she was dragging down our movement and she was bad mouthing a bunch of people and kind of like dispiriting a bunch of people. So I was like, all right, well, if you want this, I'm right here. and
you know, assuming she's not
well.
Assuming she's not a Fed, and you know, we use that term loosely because about half the time it's joking around with people in the Twitter sphere. Of course, you know.
Yeah. And by the way, I have never accused anyone of being a Fed, ever. She's the only one I've ever even hinted at it because she is just so antagonistic. I've just never seen anything like it. To come out of nowhere and to be tearing people down and to be sowing discord, like extreme Fed-like behavior. But I also don't think she necessarily is one. So for what it's worth.
I honestly think that she, assuming she's not a Fed, she could have been an asset to the party if she had approached that differently.
I told her that during our debate. I was like, if you had just approached the Mises Caucus and said, hey, I want to help, they would have been like, oh my God, let's put you in all sorts of different things. And let's really, you know, try and help each other. But she didn't do that. And it's just, that's on you. That's not on us. I mean, she's out of her mind to think that wouldn't have been how it went down. So I'm frustrated about it, but it's also kind of a nothing burger at the end of the day.
Yeah, I've been having fun with it. You know, she has a huge following, so I've been engaging a little bit, you know, just to kind of grow off of that as well.
Don't do that. Don't do that. That's the whole lesson.
But mine's for fun.
Okay.
Like, well, I'm having fun with it, you know.
If you're doing it for fun, that's fine. If you're doing it for malicious reasons, that's a different thing.
No.
And honestly, if you're going to tear down someone, it ought to be someone who's not a libertarian, who's trying to tell libertarians how they should act. I think that's a fair thing to do, because I did the same thing with like the Sarwalks. You know, when I first came into the movement, I was like, I wasn't tearing him down to elevate myself. I was tearing him down because I thought he represented something that wasn't libertarian, and that bothers me, you know. And that's the whole reason I got involved with the Mises Caucus. That's the whole reason that I wanted the Mises Caucus to take over the Libertarian Party, is because I believe that, you know, wokeness is anathema to libertarianism. It's just not what we are. Yep. And it made me furious that it was kind of like the leading edge of our marketing campaign in 2020. It made me so mad. And it's not like because I don't care about Black lives or anything like that. That's all totally not the point. And people get so confused about that. It's not that. It's that we don't believe in identity politics. We believe in liberty for all. We're not going to lead with your skin color, ever. And if we ever do that, we're so far off the path that we're supposed to be on. It's disgusting. So I'm glad to see that that nonsense has stopped to a large extent.
Well, before we get too far into this, I want you to tell the audience who may not be listening now or later who you are.
I mean, I'm the host of Liberty Lockdown. Clint Russell is the name, and was a mortgage broker for like 15 years or so. Retired 3 years ago. Started the company, or started the show up to rail against the lockdowns. Didn't expect to get the kind of traction I did, but through my Twitter account, I basically networked with all of my heroes. My heroes embraced me, and that's it. That's history.
That's really interesting that you bring that up, because something that I wanted to bring up is, I'm sure you remember the first time that Dave Smith was on your podcast, right? So,
like it was yesterday.
Yeah, and you know, Ron Paul is one of your, you know, heroes as well.
100%.
But to me, coming into this relatively new, you're kind of like my Dave Smith, and then Dave Smith is like Ron Paul.
Oh, that's crazy, dude.
And then Ron Paul's like even a step above that.
Dave's gonna hate that because I'm like 3 months older than Dave. So he's gonna be like, oh yeah, Clint's the new guy, huh? But I get what you're saying, and hey, that means the world to me, man. For me to be inspiring people at all, anybody, it's just that's why I do it. I absolutely love to like the whole reason that I wanted to be involved was not just to fix the Libertarian Party. Like that's really secondary to what my goal is. Like I wanted to reignite that flame that Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard and all of our heroes lit within me. And I felt as if it was not extinguished, but faltering. It was like, it was withering, I guess. And Dave
needed a fresh wind.
Yeah. And Dave reignited it. And I just wanted to, help him however I could, basically. And then I became a figure myself, and that was quite unexpected, but I'm very grateful that people want to hear what I have to say, and now I get to travel around the country doing it. Just actually confirmed I'll be debating Destiny, who's one of the biggest YouTubers like ever in terms of debate politics. I'll be debating him live in Tennessee on the Russia-Ukraine war, so that's going to be incredible.
Ooh, can't wait for that.
Yeah, I'm pumped. I've never done a live debate, so for me to go into the lion's den against a guy who's like, that's his profession, he's been doing it forever, I think it's really going to test my mettle, what I'm made of, and yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I feel like debate skills are that's a whole different skill set than just having someone on and conversing about whatever.
100%. And I mean, that's what he does basically constantly. So, I'm fighting a uphill battle, but I believe that I have truth on my side. So I feel like that'll offset. And if I can't win a debate about whether or not the U.S. should be escalating towards World War III, then just kick me out of the party. Like I just don't belong here anymore.
Well, you either win or you learn,
Yeah, true.
So
but like,
you're not going to lose. You're just going to get better.
Oh, dude. Yeah, I know you're being kind, but if I lose that debate, I'm going to be so mad. If I lose a debate on whether or not we should be escalating towards World War III, that is a catastrophic mistake on my part. So
yeah,
I don't think I will. I really don't.
I don't think you will either.
Yeah.
But yeah, you and your podcast and Dave and Part of the Problem literally are the two biggest influences that got me into being a libertarian. And
that's so cool, man.
That all happened during COVID and maybe a tiny bit pre-COVID, but yeah, it was a great help during that time, so I appreciate all you do in that.
Absolutely, man. I mean, Dave, I've said this story many times, but I heard Dave on Joe Rogan in like 2016, like his first ever appearance, because I was a huge Joe Rogan fan. And when I heard him on there, I was like, oh my God, I'm on Joe Rogan. Like that's what I heard. I heard myself talking to one of my heroes, and then obviously Dave became one of my heroes, and then Dave became one of my friends. So yeah, I mean,
it's so cool.
Yeah, it really is.
It's really cool how this, like, I don't want to call the Libertarian Party niche, but like this group of people gets to network over Twitter and talk about liberty and all that. And it's just cool how it like connects all of us,
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I felt so alone in the summer of 2020. I felt so alone. And I found this entire community of people that, share my values, which is freedom and being free. So that just infused a new life within me. And I feel like it hasn't been diminished one iota. If anything, it's probably increased as the download numbers go up, and you start to feel as if like, oh, people actually are listening. There's a real thing happening here. It just starts to feed upon itself, and I feel like the last month of my show has actually been the best content I've ever put out. I mean, not just guests, but also my interviewing ability, my ability to tie in my beliefs, to not just ask questions, but to give like brief monologues and things like that. I really feel like I'm getting to a level of, I don't know, professionalism or something with it that I didn't know that I was necessarily capable of. Obviously, I still listen back sometimes and I'll be like, oh, I should have asked that there, or I should have added this point there. And you can always be a harsh critic, but I definitely feel as if I'm improving every month, and I hope it doesn't stop. We'll see.
Well, you've had kind of a meteoric rise with the content or the quality of guests that you've had. Not that you've had bad ones, but
crazy, yeah.
You've had like Dr. Malone on, Dave, obviously.
Yeah,
I mean, it's been incredible
and
to watch.
two FBI whistleblowers.
Yep.
Those were both incredible episodes. Kyle Seraphin and Steve Friend actually came out just yesterday. That one, people need to listen to that one. That one is unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, Roger Stone I've had on multiple times. I've had on Dr. Joseph Ladapo, Surgeon General of Florida. I mean, Zuby and Dave Rubin and Adam Curry, and it's totally insane. Not to mention Tom Woods. So yeah.
And before I forget it, another one of the things that I like about you is that you practice what you preach. In that you literally moved from California to Florida.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't something I wanted to do either. It was just like it became untenable. It's if you really value being free, if you really value getting to decide not just what gets put on your body as in terms of a face mask, but also what gets put in your body, it's like you can't live in blue states anymore. You just can't do it. And I was in San Diego, which is like a purplish reddish area of California, but it just didn't matter. It was still completely taken over by the COVIDiot lunatics, and I didn't really have a choice. So I'm still not settled necessarily in Florida. I could end up in Texas, Tennessee, New Hampshire, who knows, maybe even become an expat at some point. But I'm very grateful to have had that option. I'm very grateful for the Federalist model that allows states' rights to have handled COVID in different ways. Because, I mean, had this been a nationwide issue, it would have been totally catastrophic. So
did you see that vote yesterday? I think it was yesterday. 201 Democrats voted to keep the COVID passport, so to speak.
Yeah. The vaccine mandate for
vaccine mandate
for people
flying into the US.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, these people are out of their fucking minds, dude. They're out of their minds. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, they're out of their minds, and they're also owned by Big Pharma. And I mean,
thank God that they didn't have the majority, but still, it's mind blowing that 201 of them would still vote for that.
Yeah, I honestly think that those, like, all 201 of them, like, people may say this isn't libertarian. I think it is. I think that they ought to be put in prison. That's my honest opinion. Like, they're violating the Constitution. You should be put in prison.
I think people should be made examples of.
Yeah,
because otherwise, all of this just keeps going. If there's no consequence,
there's no incentive for them to stop. None whatsoever. In fact, all of the incentive is in alignment with them continuing to violate the Constitution. Until we remedy that, we're going to be on a terrible path. And, a lot of people get mad when I constantly talk about, put Fauci in prison, put Birx in prison, put Biden, Trump, and put all these people in prison. Anybody that was responsible for lockdowns, put them in prison. They violated the Constitution. If you don't go to jail for that, like, you can go to jail for not paying your child support, but you don't go to jail if you violate every man, woman, and child's civil rights nationwide. Like, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a imprisonable offense as far as I'm concerned. So go to jail. Don't pass go. I'm done with you. That's how I feel.
Yeah, there has to be a consequence, or they have no incentive to not do it.
Exactly. Very straightforward.
Well, this is a special episode. We're going to focus on one topic, and that topic is ESG. And I'm so thankful that we get to talk about this, and you kind of get to inform my audience about it. Because the reason that I started this is, I would post alternative news on my social media for my circle of influence, for lack of a better word, to see. And a lot of them were unaware of some of the things that I was posting and were surprised by it, right?
Of course.
Well, ESG is definitely one of those things that 99.9% of people do not have an idea of. Yeah. So I'm really grateful that I get to have you on and bring that knowledge to them.
Sure. Happy to. Basically, it began under the United Nations in 2000. Kofi Annan had the intention was to alleviate. It started with the carbon crisis and anthropogenic global warming. That thesis was essentially the seed that sprouted all of ESG. So they come up with these sustainable development plans, and by 2004, 2005, they have the concept, the framework of ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. And it's essentially a way of partnering between big business and central banks. This never gets talked about. When anybody else that's not a libertarian talks about ESG, they always leave out the central banks because they don't understand it. But that's a very important factor. That plus the biggest businesses on earth. So those three entities, probably the most dangerous entities on earth, are all in bed with one another, all dedicated towards, quote unquote, reducing carbon, and also alleviating every ill that comes from big business, whether it be pollution or it just be income inequality. Basically, it's like whatever Marxist thing you want to make happen, ESG is the vehicle to do it. And that's what they tried to do. So in 2004, Kofi Annan sends out a letter to 50 of the biggest businesses, CEOs all over the world, and says, hey, would you like to partner with us? And almost all of them respond in the affirmative. And that includes Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank and Citigroup and all of the biggest businesses. And they say, yeah, we're in. What do you want from us? We'll gladly acknowledge that we've destroyed the world with capitalism. But why would they do that? Well, obviously, because they want to have a good relationship with the United Nations, which ultimately amounts to every government on earth, or all of the biggest economic powerhouse governments on earth, as well as the central banks. And it's just a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. If you've paid attention to Sri Lanka, if you've paid attention to much of the third world that has been dealing with food shortages, if you've been paying attention to Denmark and the farmer protests, there is a litany of examples of the starvation and impoverishment and the destruction of wealth and way of living that is coming under the guise of saving the world. That's the sickest part about it. They believe that they're doing good, and ultimately what they're doing is the highest level of crony capitalism we have ever seen in our lives. It is a global fascistic model. And the reason I make the distinction of it being global is that fascism is usually a national political vehicle. This is not. This is global in nature. So it's essentially like communal-fascism. It's a global push for the biggest businesses to work with the biggest governments to completely corner the market of every economy. And yeah, it's a disaster. Good news, though, is that I didn't even include the biggest aspect of this. Sorry, I'm trying to do Cliff's notes here, but BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they manage tens and tens of trillions of dollars with a T. Tens and tens of trillions of dollars. We're talking enormous sums of money, and
unimaginable amounts of money.
Yeah, like bigger than the GDP of the United States. Just to give like a concept of what we're talking about here. It's not their money; they're managing our money. Keep that in mind. But because they have voting rights when it comes to shareholders, because they are managing those funds, they're able to dictate what these companies do, because if you own a share of a company, you get a vote. If you own a ton of shares of a company, you get a ton of votes. So they're able to essentially dictate what all of the private businesses all over the world do, because they are investing that capital. And unfortunately, I mean, it makes perfect sense. They want to have a good relationship with the central banks and the governments, but unfortunately, because they have so much money at their disposal and they have so much sway when it comes to decision making on boards and any sort of inner working of these corporations, they get to dictate what happens at the highest level of global capitalism, quote unquote capitalism. It's not capitalism anymore. We can get into that later if you'd like. And because they have this sick worldview of ESG, they are essentially pushing businesses to go hyper woke. And because they have access to just unimaginable sums of money, it doesn't really matter if it's bad for the business, because at the end of the day, what they want is to just dictate what the global economy looks like. And they have so much sway with such an enormous sum of money that they're able to see what they want to see in the world. And they're basically unstoppable, except for, this is the good news. The good news is that many of I wish it wasn't partisan, but it is. Many of the Republican governors have woken up to what's occurring here. And they're saying, okay, yeah, this is not good for our way of life. It's not good for our electorate. Our people are starting to catch on. People are starting to wake up. And we will now divest ourselves. We will take our pension funds out of the management of BlackRock, State Street, or Vanguard, if you don't stop with this ESG nonsense. And that's great, because we're talking, tens and tens of billions of dollars. It's still not enough necessarily to get them to change their ways, but it's enough pressure that they might consider it. My personal opinion is that they're more than likely to pull back, rebrand, continue with ESG under some different moniker. So we're going to have to be very vigilant, but there has been some progress. So I don't want to just tell this story and have people be totally blackpilled like, oh my God, we're screwed. There is some momentum in the positive direction, but it's not nearly enough, and we're just getting started.
Well, when you first hear about it, it's like an insurmountable mountain.
Yes, exactly.
It just seems bigger than any one person. They can't.
And it is. No,
Yeah.
It is. I mean, it is bigger than any. Like Larry Fink is the one person that gets to dictate the most money when it comes to ESG. He's the CEO of BlackRock, but even he's not the main player in all this. Like there's people at the highest level of whatever, banking or whatever. Like he's not the guy with all that money. Yes, he manages a lot of money. Yes, he makes a lot of money, but he's not one of the, Vanderbilts or someone who owns, $1 trillion worth of wealth. So those are the people that are actually getting to dictate how this works. But the problem is because they just care about pressuring the companies to do their bidding, and they don't really care about the share value. They end up pushing these companies towards really anti-competitive, or not uncompetitive practices, where like a competitor should rise up. Like you should be able to supplant, say, Disney because it's going woke. Well, then the Daily Wire or whoever else is rising up ought to eat their lunch, right? That's how the free market is supposed to function. But because they have so much access to capital, and because the only way you can get that access to capital is by playing ball with these ESG lunatics, you essentially are undercut from your inception point. It makes it almost impossible for a startup to rise up and compete with the biggest businesses on earth that are participating in ESG. So that's the reason that we have to fight it at its root. And in my opinion, the root is central banking. It's a tough sell, but I'm doing my best to wake people up to it, and we'll see if it works.
So one of the questions I have, and tell me if I'm getting off base with this, it seems like it is a way to circumvent the people and the government of any given country, because
100%.
they no longer need votes. They no longer need the government to impose their will.
Bingo.
They get these companies to comply with what they want or the direction that they want to go.
Bingo.
And that affects, like if you're using Disney as the example, that changes the culture.
Yeah, of course. And
You're changing culture and you're changing policy by circumventing the people and their governments.
Yeah, and by the way, it's all under the guise of defending democracy and this nonsense. When ultimately what it's doing is making it so that we don't have any say as the people. It's sick, and once you see it for what it is, it's infuriating. But that's why I'm trying to educate people to what it is. It's like this is so much more nefarious than what you think on face value. Because ultimately, it allows the government to circumvent the Bill of Rights or whatever your constitution in whatever country you live in. They are able to implement their will because they're going to have backroom dealings. They're going to have conversations over the phone that you'll never know about, where they get to tell, hey, Bob Iger or whoever runs Disney or Larry Fink, like, you want us to continue to give you this special tax treatment? Well, yes, continue to push this ESG stuff, but we also want you to include whatever, trans rights or, whatever woke nonsense is the topic du jour. And even more nefarious, though, even if you don't want to go the culture route, if you just want to go Bill of Rights route, well, they can go to them and say, hey, Twitter, we would like for you, in order to help with your social score, to look after the social fabric of our nation, we're going to need you to be reporting any sort of controversial tweets to the FBI. We're going to be needing full access, a backdoor key, whatever. They can pressure them in 1,000 different ways, and ultimately it's a huge lever for them to insert themselves in the quote unquote free market. This is why I say we don't have a capitalist model. We haven't had one in a very long time, certainly not in my lifetime, and probably not since the inception of the Federal Reserve. But we're very far away from a free market at this point. So anytime someone says, well, look what capitalism's doing to us, we have inflation and we have, suicide and drug addiction. It's like, look, that ain't capitalism's fault. That's the fault of us getting away from a free market. We are so far away from a free market because the size of the government and because of the power of the central banks and the amount of currency and fiat that they print and the inflationary pressure that they just wreak havoc upon this country and this world. It's a very big, daunting concept to try and process, and I know that's probably why most people struggle with it. But I'm trying to get better and better at explaining it, so hopefully people can wrap their head around it.
Well, it's also brand new information for a lot of people.
True. Yeah. Makes it even harder.
Yeah, for sure. Especially on such a complex issue. Can you give examples of this put in practice that people may have seen?
Sure.
So I think a few months ago, there was like a NASCAR Twitter post or something post where it was catering to like LGBTQ people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've seen it from every company. I don't even have to give you one example. Just think NHL having Pride Night. Baseball has Pride Night. NFL has Black Lives Matter for an entire season and a half or 2 seasons. Every time you see wokeness infiltrate something that doesn't seem to apply at all, just think to yourself, ESG. That's what you're witnessing. You're witnessing them trying to get their S score up. The S stands for social, but what it really means is social justice. And if you know what social justice is, you should understand Marxism, because it's cultural Marxism. That is what ESG ultimately is. It's a tool by which they get to implement cultural Marxism, and it is destroying not just our economy, but also the cultural fabric by which we, function. It's terrible. So yeah, those are some examples. Some other examples I like to bring up. There was one of the biggest, I think it was called Core Logic, was one of the biggest private prisons. They had a low S score because they were beating the crap out of their prisoners. And instead of just alleviating that particular issue and firing the guards that were beating the crap out of their prisoners, they put up murals of Martin Luther King Jr. in the yard of these prisons. And that was enough to elevate their S score. I mean,
yeah, that'll fix it.
It's surface level garbage, and anybody that really understands this stuff sees it for what it is very quickly. But unfortunately, because it's new, as you said, and because most of the people involved in this sick system are woke, they think that's improvements. Like that's what they think, but it's not. I mean, it doesn't deal with the root causes of these issues. Like, yeah, state violence and beating up a prisoner is a terrible thing. Deal with that. Screw your S score. Like, if you're funded by the government, they should pull your funding if you're beating the crap out of prisoners. Like, that should be a very straightforward thing. You don't need ESG to deal with that. Okay, it's a private prison. Well, then prosecute them. They're committing a crime. You can't beat up people that haven't done anything just because they're in prison. That's not okay. No. Let's just paint a mural. Like, fuck you. Like, you're terrible. You're evil people. So I hope light bulbs are going off for people that are hearing this information for the very first time. Yeah. Well, I mean,
those examples.
Yeah. The reason I bring it up in this fashion is because for those out there that are listening that are woke, that do believe that like social justice and racial equality, like even if you disagree, like if you don't agree with me, because I don't agree with, like, I don't think that identitarianism is the way forward. Like, I think liberty for all and peace and prosperity for all is the way forward. So I'm not going to go along with your Black Lives Matter thing. Yes, like I am an all lives matter guy. Sorry, I believe that all lives matter and I'm not afraid to say it, that type of thing. But if you are the woke type, even if you are, ESG doesn't get you closer to what you want to see in the world. All it does is it monopolizes or oligopolizes. It provides very limited competition. It allows the biggest businesses on earth, the ones that you probably hate, because if you're woke, you probably don't love capitalism. Well, this ain't that. This is the worst variant, hybrid, bastardized version of capitalism, where you have the biggest governments working in tandem with the scummiest, croniest pieces of garbage in capitalism, in tandem, to not alleviate what you're concerned about, to not do anything to deal with racism on a structural level. It's a complete con job. And I hope that they're starting to internalize that, because once they do, and they realize that the only reason ESG was even rolled out is because the biggest money managers on earth realized that there was a very significant populist left movement happening globally, and they wanted to defang it. They wanted to make it so that it was powerless. So they lied to you. They told you, hey, if you just give us, you don't have to worry about us. We're JP Morgan Chase. We sponsor things that, put murals.
Are you referring to like the Occupy Wall Street?
Yes. I mean, not just that, but like just the Bernie Sanders, any populist left movement that seemed to really be taking hold over the past 20 years. They saw it coming a mile away, and they front ran you sons of bitches, and they tricked you. They tricked all of you. Not you. I'm just speaking to your audience, but
yeah, sure.
So that's what happened. It's a complete fraud.
So if they had their way, what is their end game with this?
As much power, wealth, control as possible. Same story as it's always been.
Yeah. And has this been adopted by the WEF, or was this from the WEF?
No, it was adopted by the WEF.
Okay.
Its origin. There are some. The ideology stems, like, its origin point comes from like two sides. So you have Klaus Schwab. You have this belief in overpopulation that comes all the way from the 70s. Earlier than that, but it really took root, and Klaus started to write books about it in the 1970s. He's the head of the WEF. And then he saw it as the perfect vehicle to do what he wanted to do. And because of his networking of all these other, globalist Marxists, he got them together. He got all the biggest politicians together. And then, of course, all of the crony capitalists want to be as close to the power as possible. So they all come too. And that's how it actually came to pass. But the WF didn't really start pushing it until like 2010, 11, 12. So the UN was really the inception point when it took hold.
Gotcha. So is there anything that normal people can do to prevent this from advancing any further than it already is?
Yeah. I mean, first, try and tell people about it. That helps. But I think what you can actually do in your own life is, if you have a 401k, if you have a retirement fund, make sure that the person that's managing it is not managing it under ESG guidance. ESG is basically just an accounting terminology at this point, where they give a scoring metric based off of environmental, social, and governance. These three metrics that are broken into thirds, and if it's high enough, then they'll invest your capital into that company, and if it's too low, then they won't. That's exactly how it works. So when you realize that ESG is a fraud, you should say to yourself, I don't want to be participating in this at all, so I'm going to withdraw my funds from any manager that ever mentions either ESG or equity, inclusion, any sort of Marxist talking point. Get away from these people. They're not your friends. They don't believe in capitalism at all. They don't at all. So do you want someone who doesn't believe in capitalism managing your money? The answer ought to be no. do not trust these people with your money. So that's the main thing that you can do. Continue to put consumer pressure on these guys. Let them know we know what's happening and we don't want it to happen anymore. And if that's not enough, well, then just pray.
Awesome. So DeSantis is kind of leading the way with fighting back in both culture war and that. How do you feel about DeSantis?
It's a mixed bag. I love many of the things that he takes a stand on and he fights back against are the things I care about. He oftentimes does it in a way that I wouldn't, though. Like, he does a lot of status things, that I don't love. But he's also had some really good kind of like libertarian solutions to these things. Like when he said, okay, we're going to pull the Florida state pension away from these ESG lunatics. Like, I was cheering as loud as possible. I mean, that's awesome, because that's not status at all. He's just saying, like, I'm not going to let you manage our state pension. I mean, the fact that there is a state pension is obviously status, but I'm saying, like, there's nothing wrong with him saying, we're not going to let our enemies manage our retirement funds for the people that live here. That's insane. So that was a great intermediate step, but he does some things that I don't like. So mixed bag. Sure. You know, I also don't believe his foreign policy is very good. I think that he would be not necessarily a neocon, but like not good either. So that to me is a non-starter. Like, I would prefer him to stay governor of Florida for as long as possible and never be president. But it doesn't look like I'm going to get that choice, because I'm pretty sure he's going to run. And I personally would be surprised if he doesn't win. We'll see, though.
Yeah. Let's see here. Trying to think if you have anything else you want to talk about on ESG?
Dude, I've talked about it so much, I don't even know. I mean, if there's any holes in it that you have, I'd certainly be happy to fill them. But it's sorry, that sounded sexual. My apologies. But
had it from Tower Gang.
Yeah, exactly. There's the Tower Gang side of me. Yeah, I mean, I just want to add, I guess, that, like, don't let it dishearten you. Like, just realize that, like, what this ultimately amounts to is state-based capitalism. That's the same thing that the Chinese do. Do you think that the Chinese are going to take over the world by having a centrally planned economy? The answer, my friend, is no. Because if you have a free market capitalist model that is competing with a centrally planned model, the free market capitalist model will win out eventually if it's given the opportunity to. The tragic part is that because the US is modeling the Chinese economic model, we are no longer able to outcompete them because we're playing their game. The way we win is to get back to basics and to get back to capitalism, not run away from it, not supplement it with social welfare, not supplement it with UBI and central bank digital currencies. None of that. We don't do any of that. We go to sound money. We get away from central banking. We get away from deficit spending. We get away from printing. We basically everything that every Austrian economics guy has ever talked about. That's the solution. And as long as libertarians are the vanguard of discussing ESG, we can actually prescribe what will heal this issue. And if we aren't, if we fail in this moment and we allow the GOP to be the ones that handle it, then I just expect it to be swept under the rug, papered over, and ultimately we'll be screwed. So that's my goal over the past 2 years has been to try and have a voice in this debate, because I feel like I have something unique to add, because the GOP, while they understand it better than the left, certainly because it's hurting them right now, they don't understand actually how to solve it and how to create an economy that allows people to thrive. So that's my passion in it. That's the reason that I think that I get invited to talk about it so much, is because very few people, for whatever reason, they don't have the background of Austrian economics. They don't have the background of being an entrepreneur or managing hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, I've done all these things. So I just have a very niche set of skills that, like, perfectly aligned for me to be the person to talk about this. So I feel very blessed that I had that background to be able to now, voice my concerns and hopefully educate people so that it doesn't get as bad as it possibly could. Because if you've looked at Sri Lanka, if you've looked at the Danish and other nations, like, it can get very, very, very bad.
And bad very quickly.
Yes. Yes. And by the way, like, the economic path that we're on right now is extraordinarily treacherous, and it will result in ruin. So we have to change. The answer is, or the question is, are we going to change just by voting Republican and having them ultimately not cut any of the stuff that needs to be cut? Or are we going to actually, like, really face what we're up against, which is a debt that will never be paid back, ever? Are we going to face that? Because it's going to happen in our lifetimes. So do you want it to happen when you're 70 and your grandchildren now starve to death? Or do you want to face it now? My personal preference is that we face it now. I think that also, the sooner we face it, the less painful it'll be. So I think that it's not just the pragmatic, but also the moral answer. We have to face it now. And our political class will not, because their incentive structure is, can I get reelected? That's all they care about. And if that's the answer, if that's how they're viewing this, well, then they're not going to face it. Why would they? So it's going to require the people to say, yes, we know this is going to hurt, but we know it's the right thing to do, and we know it's going to hurt way worse if we just delay this for another decade or 15 years. So
it's kicking the can down the street. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm sounding the same exact alarm that Ron Paul sounded in 2004 or 5 about the real estate crisis that was coming. I'm now sounding that on the central bank debt and the national government debt level, sovereign debt. Like that's the next implosion to come, and it is going to be unbelievable. It's going to be just so catastrophic, and no one's ready for it. And most people don't even think it's possible, which means it's going to be really, really bad because no one's preparing for it either.
Yeah.
So I'm doing everything I can to try and turn the ship around before we get there.
Well, Clint, I appreciate you coming on, man. I really
Absolutely.
do. I look up to you, so it was an honor having you on. Do you want to plug anything?
Sure. Liberty Lockdown. I just remind people the Steve Friend episode. He's a current but suspended FBI agent for whistleblowing about the corruption within the FBI from January 6th, the Whitmer trial, to everything. I mean, it's just a tour de force interview. 1 hour of, he's like one of the greatest Americans I've ever spoken to, and that is so hard for me to say because he was a Fed, but he is a great human being. I mean, this guy is incredible. So I think if people check that out, they'll become an instant fan of my show. You just don't get discussions like that anywhere. They just don't exist. So I hope people will check that out. And if you want more of my zany, insane, effed up humor, Tower Gang is the place to be. And I'll give a shout out to my buddy Reed Coverdale and Jose Gallison. They are on Timcast IRL right now as we're talking, and I'm going to go finish watching that now. Just give them support too.
Yeah, can't wait to listen tomorrow. All right, Clint. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Casey. Have a good night.
You too.